Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Nerd to the Third Power, your one-stop shop for all things nerdy and awesome. I am your host and master of ceremonies, Dr. Gonzo. With me, as always, in this epic quest of awesomeness is our resident anime goddess, the Cat. Cat, how you doing?
I'm okay. I'm alive. Y'all, it's been a day. Yes.
New job wearing you out?
Well, that and my heinous car accident last week.
Oh, shit!
Yeah. So, at the time of recording this episode, I was in a car accident last week. I've totaled my car. I'm in a lot of pain still. I got a little sprain in my wrist. And my back is like, nope, tired of sitting. Time for sleeping.
Yeah,
okay.
Now, this isn't the first wreck you've ever been, and I seem to recall you being in one before. You don't seem to have great luck with vehicles, says the guy who's totaled 3 cars.
Yeah, I have never been the cause of an accident up until now, but it's honestly not my fault that this guy came to a dead stop on the middle of the highway. But the last wreck that I was in that you remember, because we were in college at the time, my dad was driving.
Now this guy who came to the stop in front of you, I have to ask, was he Pennsylvanian?
No, because I live in fucking Missouri, and he was probably from Illinois.
Okay, because, every state has its brain damage when it comes to driving, and I've noticed that Pennsylvanians have what I can only describe as being a sexual love for sudden stops for no goddamn reason in the middle of an empty road. So, but anyway. Alright, well, Mike is still, he's out of the hospital, but he is still in recuperation, so we wish him all the best. But we have Skyblaze here with us. Skyblaze, how are you doing?
Still a bit broken, but better than I was. So we're getting there.
Okay, the graph is trending up then.
Slowly. I might have to have more surgery, which we all know is deeply exciting. But I'm on medication to control the pain, so it's all fine.
Well, I feel kind of bad now. The worst thing that I have to report is I have to get a filling put in next week. So,
Oh no, that's terrible.
I know. I have to go see the dentist. Those paid torturers of men. Nah, it's just a small thing. I won't even need anesthetic for it. So, but anyway, we have a really fun show for you guys tonight. We're trying something a little new. This is our first edition of Nerd Wars, where two of us come in and have a debate over merits or demerits of a certain topic. And we thought that it would be fun to do a debate over which was the better handheld console, the Game Boy or the Game Gear. So I will be arguing for the Game Boy, and Skyblaze will be arguing for the Game Gear while Cat moderates. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But of course, there is procedure to follow, so we're going to begin, as always, with the Ask the Geek. And a reminder, if you're listening to us on YouTube, please do remember to hit the like and subscribe and hit that bell. It helps our channel grow, and we would really appreciate it. So our first question here comes from Paul, and it's for me, but I'm going to go ahead and open up to Skyblaze. And his question is, have you ever finished a game and then had trouble deciding what to play next because you were so overwhelmed with emotions from the previous game? And yeah, I have this problem a lot, especially with if the game that I've just finished is one that I've invested a whole lot of time in. I just finished Earthbound for the first time, and it took me a straight week of multi-hour marathon sessions to finish it. And then after I finished it, I was just like, okay, what the hell to play next? And I realized that is just the epitome of first world problems, to have nearly 1,100 games in your collection and not being able to decide what to play next. But no, yeah, I definitely have trouble sometimes, following up a game that I just finished with, trying to find something else. Skyblaze, what about you? You ever have this issue?
Oh yeah. The most recent example I can think of is when I finished Nier Automata. Because that game, holds you down and hits you over the head with the feels bat. And then you finish it and you're like, ow. I have many feelings. And now I don't know what to do. Because for a while, everything just felt really shallow after that. I had to go and play like Diablo 3 for a while just to remind myself what gaming isn't necessarily supposed to beat you up emotionally.
See, I found when I have those, what's next problems, is I'll put in something that's just really light, like maybe I might play a few rounds of Tetris or some Super Mario Brothers, just something that I can just pick up and mess around with for a few minutes, and then normally I'll find something else that I want to really devote some time to, a little bit later. The thing that worries me when it happens to me is, I'm sure I've mentioned this on the show before. I occasionally have depressive spells. So, and one of the big symptoms with my depressive spells is I find myself being not really willing or being able to summon up the energy to play video games. So anytime I'm in a state where I can't immediately pick up a game and start playing, I'm like, okay, am I just being indecisive, or is this the start of another spell? So
there's actually a name for it. It's called anhedonia. It means you can't take enjoyment out of things that you usually enjoy.
Yeah. So I sometimes get worried that like that's what's happening to me, but I've already found something, so I'm doing good right now. And let's kind of turn this over to Kat and kind of reword the question a little bit. Kat, do you ever when you after you finish an anime have trouble deciding what to watch next afterwards? Have you ever had something like this happen to you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've all had that. There have been shows that have beat me up so bad, or podcasts that I've listened to that have beat me up so bad emotionally that I'm just like kind of like stunned for a couple of days, where I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, I can't figure out what media I can consume next that will be the right thing, like put me in the right mood. That usually results in me re-listening to or re-watching the thing that just beat me up. I'm like, I don't know what else to do. I guess I need to watch this again. No, all over again, my heart.
I'm not sure that's healthy, but that's for other minds to decide.
I can't say a great deal because I watched the Chernobyl miniseries like 3 times through, and that is like quite brutal. So, yeah.
My worst one was the Magnus Archives podcast, where I caught up like 4 seasons, and then went, what do I do with my life now? I should just start it from the beginning. And I did that twice. And it's a really long podcast, you guys. So it was like several months of my life where it was like, sorry, if you're not the Magnus Archives, I can't give you my time.
As someone who once shotgunned the entire Big Finish Doctor Who audio archive, and then was left with no purpose in life, I feel that pain. So I know very well how that feels.
And that's a big feckin' archive.
One of the perks of working pizza delivery for 6 years, I spent a lot of time in my car, and I had a lot of time to listen to audio dramas.
Good point.
So, anyway, let's see here now. Next question. All right, here's a question here. This is from Lacey, and she asked, I guess I made an offhanded comment about this in a previous episode. How do you accidentally buy a PlayStation 5? Okay, all right, so
by being Dr. Gonzo, that's how.
Pretty much. So what happened was, so I follow this guy on Twitter. You've probably heard of him, Wario64. He's always tweeting these deals when, these consoles are back in stock. And he happened to tweet that this GameStop bundle's up. And just as a complete joke, just to see how far I would get, I clicked on it and I started putting in my information to put in an order just to see how far I could get before it told me it was sold out. And y'all, everything that could go wrong did go wrong in the process of this transaction. I put in the wrong address. I had to re-enter my credit card number 3 times because the fucking phone wouldn't scan. I got like 404 errors. I lost connection to my Wi-Fi at one point. This was like a 15-minute transaction trying to get this whole thing done. So finally, by then, I'm like, okay, these have to have been sold out by now. There's no possible way there could be anything left. So I hit submit order. Congratulations on your purchase. We sent you a confirmation email. What? Bear in mind, this is like an $800, bundle that I'm slapping money down, and I'm just like, I don't really have that right now because I just finished moving. So it's kind of like, and when the hell am I ever going to find one of these again? So yes, that's how you accidentally buy a PlayStation 5. Okay, next question here. Let's see. Okay. All right, here is one for you, Skyblaze, and this one comes from Ray, and they ask, what is a classic Doctor Who monster that you would like to see come back?
Oh, wow. Well, the one that I really did want to come back is the one they did for the anniversary special, and that was the Zygons, because I think there was a lot of potential with the Zygons, and they did bring them back, and I didn't think they would. So that was pretty cool.
The Zygons have been back a couple of times since then, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. There was a pretty cool episode with Peter Capaldi and the Zygons kind of sort of integrating into humanity, and then maybe not, and then they did, and what else? Part of me wants to say the Zarbi for a laugh, but no.
The Zarbi?
Zarbi. They're from William Hartnell's Doctor, and they're like really obvious. They kind of look like paper mache ant fronts with like really obviously human legs, and they're hilarious. So that would be amusing. It's not going to happen. It'd be hilarious, though. I think they've actually shown up in at least one of the Big Finish episodes, but I can't remember which one.
I wouldn't remember. After 100 of them, they all kind of bleed together.
Yeah.
They all kind of bleed together.
What were the name of those? I can't remember what they were called. The robot people who dressed in the amazing white disco outfits. And they were the enemies of the Daleks. What's it called?
The Thals?
No, they were robots.
Yeah. When you said white disco, disco outfits, that doesn't really narrow it down.
I think it began with R. Because they made a plague, and that was like killing the inside of the.
Okay, well, while Skyblaze researches that, Kat, what about you? Any classic Doctor Who monsters that you'd like to see make a reappearance?
I don't have any frame of reference for this. I'm not the one who did all the classic Doctor Who stuff. Nothing. I have no opinion on this.
You did not do as I did when I discovered Doctor Who and dive headfirst into a giant pool from which there is almost no escape.
No,
Some people have restraint.
You got into Doctor Who hard, and I got into Critical Role hard, and we've probably listened to and watched the same amount of hours, but very different things.
All right. Well, then I guess it'll just come to Skyblaze when it comes. Okay, alrighty, and with that is all the Ask Geek questions that we have for this week. Thank you as always for sending them in. As always, you can send them to us through the email at drgonzo@nerdtothethirdpower.com. We love getting your questions, love reading them on the air, so yeah, go ahead and get your question in, and you just might get yours read on the show.
Vellans. I'm a Vellans, the androids.
There we go. All right. Well, and now on to the meat and potatoes of this episode, and that is the Nerd War, Game Boy versus Game Gear. We are finally going to settle the debate as to which is the better console. And moderating this is our Madam Moderator, the Cat. So, Cat, what are the rules and regulations of this debate?
Okay, so we've basically got two rules. The first rule is that you cannot go, history shows, and then just leave it at that. You have to explain and argue why what history shows is or is not help or detrimental to the console. And then our second rule is that no arguments can be based on personal preference. All arguments for or against must be backed up with reason and logic and facts. All right.
Okay. All right, and of course the moderator is permitted, nay, encouraged to ask questions for clarification, if such is necessary. So the sides, I will be arguing for the Game Boy because I am a Nintendo fanboy, and Skyblaze, our resident Sega nerd, will be arguing for the Game Gear. So I guess let's just go ahead with our opening statement. So Skyblaze, I yield the floor to you.
Okay, first of all, I'm going to go ahead and admit, right off the bat, that the Game Boy outsold the Game Gear. However, there are a lot of features that the Game Gear has that the Game Boy just doesn't match up well against.
Okay.
And in a lot of technical aspects, the Game Gear is superior, and I intend to show that.
Okay. My esteemed opponent has made their case for the Game Gear and declared their intentions. It is my intention to prove that the Game Boy is the superior console. I intend to argue this. Well, shit. I'm great at making arguments, not so much as opening statements. My esteemed opponent has declared their support for the Game Gear, as we expected. I intend to prove that although the Game Boy may not have been the most technically powerful console as the Game Gear, that it utilized its resources and its library and its brand more effectively than the Game Gear, and that it was the superior console. And for clarity's sake, I am only arguing for the original Game Boy, not the Game Boy Color or the Game Boy Advance. So, with that, we will now present our first arguments. So, Skyblaze, I yield the floor to you.
Well, I'd just like to say that I did actually own a Game Boy. One of the OG massive things. I have really tiny hands, but even I found the way that you have to kind of grip the Game Boy at the bottom to be kind of uncomfortable after a while. If you look at the difference between the ergonomics of the Game Gear and Game Boy, you will discover that because it's designed in a way so you can hold it at either side of the screen instead of underneath, it tends to be much more comfortable to hold for a long time. You will also notice that Nintendo themselves caught onto this because the Game Boy Advance has a very similar sort of structure, as does the PSP and the Vita. And the Switch, for that matter.
I'm gonna rebut this by saying that although that the design of the Game Boy was very deliberately designed that way to be held at the bottom, to make it easier to carry around in your pocket. I feel like that makes the Game Boy a bit more portable. Because the Game Gear was a pretty massive console. It was a big sucker, and just pulling a personal anecdote from my childhood, I knew a guy growing up who had a Game Gear and had a carrying case for it, and the whole damn thing was as big as his backpack. It was a beast. Whereas I could just slip, the Game Boy into, a pouch of my backpack or even in my pocket, and throw a couple of games in another pouch of my backpack, and I'd be good to go. The Game Gear, I would argue, because of that form factor, it limits the portability. Another thing that I would argue limits the portability of the Game Gear and is a point in favor of the Game Boy is the battery life. So the Game Gear took, I believe it was 6 AA batteries. Was it 6 or was it 8?
6.
6. Okay.
You think it was the Nomad that took 8?
Okay. So the Game Gear took 6 AA batteries and would burn through them in the course of 3 hours. So if you were going on
3 to 5 hours.
3 to 5 hours.
You could get up to 5 hours.
Only Gonzo, facts only.
You could get 3 to 5 hours of battery life out of that, which if you're taking that on on a long road trip, which for those of you who don't remember life before the COVID, was when you would get in a car and drive places for vacation. You would either have to have a giant sack full of batteries, or you'd have to buy a car charger, which I don't recall being very common, and I believe were also rather expensive back in the day. Whereas the Game Boy, you could get like 15 to 30 hours out of 4 AA batteries. So
a citation needed. I'm not sure that's true.
Okay, all right, I will look that up.
Because I, as I said, I remember having one of these, and I don't think that's accurate.
Game Boy battery life, approximately 15 hours of gameplay. So,
right, not
for the original.
For the original, yes.
Okay.
On 4 AA's. So if we're assuming a road trip time of 8 hours each way, 1 refill of batteries and you're good to go.
Question from the moderator here, since so for clarification, my brother and I shared an original Game Boy when we were very, very young, and I of course never had a Game Gear, so forgive what I don't know about handheld consoles. What did the battery life go into on these units? Because I know that the Game Boy was a black and white screen.
I was going to get into this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Please tell me about the screen of the Game Gear.
Right, so the Game Boy has a black and white screen. Well, green and black, technically. Yeah. It also does not have a backlight.
Point of order: the Game Boy Pocket was in fact black and white, and also eliminated the ghosting issue on the original units.
Yeah, but we're talking about the OG. If you're allowed to start talking about the Game Boy Pocket and that, I'm allowed to start talking about the Nomad.
Fair point.
So the original Game Boy had a green and white screen, and as Dr. Gonzo mentioned, it had a bit of a smearing and ghosting issue, where the sprites would look like they were kind of leaving a trail behind them, so it was difficult to pinpoint exactly where they were. It also, most importantly, did not have a backlight, so you had to be in a very well-lit area in order to use the Game Boy, the original one. By contrast, the Game Gear had a LCD screen that was in full colour and had a backlight. The problem with this is that it's specific. It's not the screen that actually takes up most of the battery power. It's actually the backlight, because it's a tube light, and that sucks up quite a lot of the battery power by itself. As an aside, it's actually quite a common mod to remove that and put LEDs in it, and that increases the battery life exponentially. I've actually got a Game Gear on my workbench waiting for that exact mod to be done. But that's beside the point.
See, I would argue that the fact that mod even exists, that you have to remove that tube light, that to me says that the technology wasn't there yet for backlit handheld consoles to really be a very viable option at that point in time. Because remember,
the mod exists to put a backlight in a Game Boy.
And I would say that the fact that true, yes, the mod exists to put a backlight into a Game Boy, but if we're talking strictly the stock units, remember this was back in the 90s where a 50-inch TV was about the size of a room because everything was using tubes, which use up a lot of power. So I acknowledge that the color is a step up from the Game Boy, I would say that the backlight was a detriment to the console because of that drain on the battery life. Now,
I was just about to also address this. One thing you did not mention is that there was 2 different types of power packs that were available to extend the battery life. There was one that would clip to your belt, and there was another one that clipped to the back of the Game Gear. And these could nearly double the battery life.
Even with the doubling, that's still what, 6 hours? 6 to 12 hours? whereas the
Yeah.
Game Boy natively got minimum 15 hours.
If you could see it.
Yeah. If you were on your very long road trip, you would maybe have, 4 or 5 hours usefully before you were too dark to see.
Well, that would depend on when your parents woke you up to put you out on the road. But that's not really germane to the discussion. The other thing that I would argue, places that made the Game Boy ultimately the superior console was how it was its branding and how it reached out to its audience. So, one of the things that made the Game Boy so successful was that its pack-in title was Tetris. This is a game that, not just hardcore gamers, but like people my parents' age or older would play. It's a game that everybody could pick up and understand. And it was included as a pack-in title with the Game Boy. And I feel like that helped it show itself as being more accessible to the common layperson. Whereas with the Game Gear, I think Game Gear, I think like Sonic the Hedgehog, I think Shining Force, I think Echo the Dolphin. I can't really think of any really famous titles that had that same accessibility as, say, like, Tetris, or I think there was also Space Invaders port on the Game Boy. So I would argue that while yes, there weren't as many so-called, I kind of hate this term, hardcore games on the Game Boy as there were on the Game Gear, I would argue that accessibility for a more casual audience allowed the game is a big part of what made the Game Boy so successful and what ultimately made it the better console all around.
Question from the moderator: did it? So it would make it more accessible. Is there any hard data to suggest that a wider audience was actually using it? So, for example, my parents would know of Tetris and Space Invaders from, other Commodore or, arcade games or something like that. But my parents never played the Game Boy. So, is there any substantial proof to say this could appeal to a wider audience and did financially or in sales or whatever actually get used by the wider audience?
When Gunpei Yokoi, God rest his soul, designed the Game Boy, he was the one who made the decision to include Tetris, because the story goes he saw a bunch of Japanese salarymen playing with fiddling with their calculators on the train, and the story goes that after the Game Boy came out, he would go on his daily commute and he would see the train car full of those same salarymen playing Tetris on their Game Boy. As the personal anecdote, when I first got my Game Boy, my father bought for himself a copy of Chessmaster, which he would actually play. And this is a man who never played video games otherwise. Let me look up some. But you wanted some sales numbers. Tetris Game Boy pack-in numbers.
I'm less concerned about the sales numbers and more concerned, since you made the point, of the variety of people who were playing it.
Okay. Well, then ignoring the sales numbers, but like that was explicitly the purpose of including Tetris as a pack-in with the original Game Boy, as opposed to, say, like Super Mario Brothers or a Zelda game, was because of that accessibility. Because the Game Boy was originally designed to be something. The Game Boy was designed to be something that you could pick up, play for a few minutes, and then set down, just as a commute. Whereas with the Game Gear, you have a lot of games, like I mentioned, Shining Force, which is a multi-hour RPG. That's something that you have to sit down and devote some real time to. And again, going back to that battery life, you can't really do that uninterrupted because you drain the battery so quick. So I would argue that while, yes, the Game Gear was geared more towards a hardcore audience, I think ultimately the accessibility of the Game Boy is what propelled it to its success. And now I yield to Skyblaze for a rebuttal.
I would say about this is that the Game Gear had one particular thing that As far as I'm aware, the Game Boy never did. And that's a TV tuner. Now, this means that you could slot in a device into the cartridge port and you could turn your Game Gear into a small TV. I am not making this up. It had a massive aerial. It was like a 2-foot-long aerial when it was fully extended. There's also, and this is so bizarre that it hurts my brain, but it's a thing, there's an AV port on the TV tuner. So it is theoretically possible, with some adapters, to hook up, say, an Xbox 360 or a PS3 to a Game Boy and play it on that tiny screen.
A Game Boy?
Game Gear. Sorry, I'm. Dude, it's nearly midnight. I am very tired.
Yeah,
I really want to play a Game Boy now. I just want to know what that is, and I want to play it.
There probably is one because
the
there's
Coacher
every
console.
kind. Yeah.
Okay, I remember the TV tuner because the same friend that had the Game Gear had one because he was that kid. He was that rich kid who had like all the neat shit. He had a Neo Geo in his house, just for frame of reference, but that's neither here nor there. But I remember the TV tuner. I also remember that it sucked because it couldn't pick up signal for shit.
It was fine in the UK.
Yeah, but in the US, where you're typically much further away from your local television station, it didn't do shit. And because also there's a lot of overlap, there was also a lot of overlap in the 90s, frequency-wise, between television stations and radio stations. You could be getting video from a television station, and your audio could be coming from a radio station because there was a lot of crosstalk. So yeah, I remember the TV tuner, and I remember that it was bad. It was not a successful peripheral over here.
One other thing, and another device that could be hooked into the Game Gear, is the Master Gear Converter. Now, on a technical level, a Game Gear is basically a Master System in a smaller box. This means that it is pretty easy to play Master System games on a Game Gear. It's a fairly simple pass-through converter. I think the only thing that it would do is resize the video output to 160 by 144. You can't use other accessories like the Master System light phaser gun, because that doesn't really work. But other than that, you can play Master System games completely portably. And this more than doubles the available library.
I would argue that would be more of a success in Europe than it was in the US because the Master System wasn't a huge seller here in the States.
Are you familiar with the mysterious other world that is Brazil?
Brazil's just freaky for the Master System. They're still making games over there, but that's
they're
Brazil.
Still making Master Systems over there.
But that's getting a little off topic.
I'm not sure that it is, because you're arguing that it didn't do well in America, so it doesn't count, which irritates me for a start off. But yet somehow Brazil doesn't count.
Okay, well then let me try a different tack here. You're bringing up all of these accessories that can add all of these extra features to the Game Gear, whereas the Game Boy didn't need any of those extra features. It was successful enough on its own. Excuse me, I'm getting a little parched here. You had accessories for the Game Boy. You had the attachable light lens, or you had the Handy Boy, which I actually had, and was an absolutely freakish thing.
I had the light and the magnifying glass for mine, both of which were completely useless.
Yeah. But there wasn't anything that you would attach the Game Boy that added additional functionality like watching television, and I would argue that the Game Boy didn't need that based on the strength of its library, including the big one, which is Pokemon, which I would argue is huge to the Game Boy's legacy, because the social aspect that it introduced with the link cable and being able to trade and battle other people was if not a Kickstarter, at least an early instance of the social aspect of gaming that is now so crucial to the modern gaming scene. I would say that it was the Game Boy and Pokemon that really kickstarted that, because when Pokemon came out, like, everyone I knew as a kid, was into this. It was like, I don't know if it was the same in Europe, but at least in the States and Japan, like, it was a cultural phenomenon. Like, everybody was into Pokemon.
It took quite a lot longer for it to get going in Europe and the UK.
Yeah. For a stretch of like 3 years, like, everybody was into Pokemon. Everybody was doing trades and battle, and I would argue that again, going back to that ease of portability and accessibility with the Game Boy, I don't think you could have done something similar on the Game Gear. I can't remember. Did the Game Gear even do multiplayer? I seem to recall that it had a link cable of its own, but I don't think I've ever seen one in the wild.
It did, but it wasn't. I don't know if it was very well distributed outside of Japan, which is a problem considering that the biggest market for the Game Gear was Europe and Brazil.
Yeah, I know. I've never seen a Game Gear link cable in the wild.
Yeah, there was a bit of a problem with Sega in the 90s, in that it seemed to believe that if it wasn't a success in Japan, it wasn't a success. I mean, the Master System did phenomenally well in Europe and in Brazil. And Brazil, I've just looked it up, is the 5th largest market for video games.
Really?
Yep.
Huh. Well, I have learned something today. That brings up another point. We both are aware of the rivalry, would be to put it generously, between Sega of Japan and Sega of America.
Yeah.
And how they kind of, backstabbed each other back and forth with that, and how it was hampering to Sega's consoles. Whereas with Nintendo, both the Japanese and the American branches put their full support behind the Game Boy, and so we didn't get a lot of the sort of shortchanging behind the scenes that we saw on the Sega side of things with Nintendo. So we didn't have a whole bunch of this. Okay, well, is this game going to come over to the US from Japan, or is the Japanese branch going to be mean and go, yeah, no, you can't have this? And again, I feel like that
there
unity.
was a bit more to it than that. That is a gross simplification of what was actually going on.
Well, we only have another 20 minutes, so I have to kind of cut for time. But again, Nintendo, both the Japanese and American sides, and even the European sides, once they finally got their act together, but that's a whole nother discussion about the NES. They both threw their full support behind the Game Boy, and I feel like that was another factor in their success, was that you didn't have the kind of squabbling behind the scenes. But that's kind of going on a bit of a tangent. But circling back to
when was the original Game Boy first released?
I believe it was 1989. Let me take a look. April 21st, 1989.
Because the Game Gear wasn't released until late 1990. So Nintendo kind of stole the march on them a bit. They had already time to get established.
I would argue that that's a moot point, because, as you mentioned, while Sega may not have necessarily been a huge success with the Master System in the US, it was huge everywhere else. So that brand recognition was there. And apparently was not enough to carry the Game Gear. So I would argue that the Game Boy coming out first is a moot point. I don't argue that as getting tongue tied here. I would not argue that as being a as big a factor in the Game Boy's success as other factors.
Okay, so me as not a gamer, tell me about the game titles. Now, we've talked about how the Game Gear had slightly more hardcore games, and then the Game Boy had slightly more universally accessible games. What has been like the legacy of those games, I would guess? Tell me about how the games impacted the history or the usage or the whatever. Talk to me about the games, guys.
Well, for the Game Boy, the big one's Pokemon, which, I mean, we've already talked at length, not just in this episode, but in previous episodes, about, how much of a meteorite that was to the gaming market. But as far as other games, other game titles, I mean, Nintendo brought their all their stable of IPs to the Game Boy. You had Mario, which had a very successful trilogy of Mario Land games on the Game Boy. You had Zelda, which had Link's Awakening, which was so good that it got a barely touched up re-release on the Game Boy Color and sold like gangbusters there as well. And then a remake on the Switch. You had the second Metroid game. You even had some Nintendo IPs get their start on the Game Boy that are still going strong today and are huge. Kirby. A lot of people forget this. Kirby got his first start on the Game Boy in Kirby's Dream Land, and he's one of Nintendo's most recognizable properties to this day. The little pink puffball there. So I would argue that Nintendo really, in addition to the accessible, kind of casual games like Tetris and Space Invaders, they were also able to successfully leverage their IPs into a portable mode. You also had some support from SquareSoft before they merged with Square Enix. So you had games like Final Fantasy Adventure, Final Fantasy Legends. So there were a lot of the big console IPs that had been huge. Mega Man, another one that was big on the NES and found success on the Game Boy as well. So I would say that because Nintendo was able to successfully leverage these games that had been successful on these game franchises that have been successful on home consoles and on a less powerful system than the NES at that, not to mention introduce some new IPs like Kirby and Pokemon that are still going strong today. Whereas I'm racking my brain, and outside of Sonic and maybe Shining Force, I can't think of any franchises that positioned themselves on the Game Gear that were as successful as the Nintendo IPs that were on the Game Boy.
Let's see. Columns, Streets of Rage and Streets of Rage 2. There was a version of Prince of Persia that was on the Game Gear. Sonic Chaos was on the Game Gear. There was a Castlevania-alike called Master of Darkness that was also on the Game Gear. There were several Sonic side games, things like Tails Adventure. What was the other one? I can't remember what the other one was called. My brain is fried. There was a version of Mega Man that was on the Game Gear, which is a bit weird to see Mega Man on where?
That game goes for buku bucks, by the way. I saw one in the wild. It was like $250, and I'm like, no.
Also, are you familiar with the recent remake of Wonder Boy? Wonder Boy the Dragon's Trap?
Which one? There's been a couple.
Yeah, Wonder Boy the Dragon's Trap.
Yeah, I think I actually had that in my Switch library.
Yep. On the Game Gear originally.
Okay.
So, as you mentioned, Shining Force had a couple of entries that were on the Game Gear. One of the major advantages of the Game Gear actually, was that it was really, really easy to port things from the Master System to the Game Gear. Sometimes you'd actually get versions that were expanded versus the Master System versions. They were actually more complete. And sometimes they looked better because the Game Gear actually had a slightly larger colour palette, I think. Let me just double check that. I'm pretty sure that's right. Yeah, wider variety of colours and had featured playback in stereo sound. The Game Boy didn't have stereo sound unless you plugged headphones in, did it?
No, it had a mono speaker.
I thought that was right. Yeah. So yeah, there were quite a number of games that were excellent on the Game Gear. I mean, some of them are a little bit more obscure. Things like Dragon Crystal is a little bit more obscure, but if you're the sort of person who wants to collect games, then the Game Gear is actually a pretty good place to start because there's a lot of games out there that people don't really know about. Even a lot of retro collectors don't know about some of them. Things like there's a version of Castle of Illusion that's on the Game Gear and is virtually identical to the version that's on the Mega Drive. The one that really blows my mind, though, is that there's a version of Mortal Kombat 2 on the Game Gear. And it plays really, really well.
Okay, one last point that I want to make, because we are going to have to start wrapping up in a few minutes here, is durability. The Game Boy, practically indestructible.
Bring this up.
Practically indestructible. I think we've all seen the famous photograph of the Gulf War Game Boy that got firebombed in Desert Storm and still plays Tetris. I think the only thing they had to do was they had to replace the screen because it melted. If you threw a Game Boy at somebody, you meant them grievous bodily injury. And I don't recall the Game Gear having that same durability, which, if you're talking about a portable console that's going to be doing a lot of moving around, you really want something that's going to be, very sturdy and very difficult to damage. Not something like, those first generation iPhones, which would shatter if you so much as looked at them funny. Whereas the Game Boy, I mean, it was the perfect console for kids because of how much abuse it could take and keep on trucking.
The only bit of the Game Gear that was actually that fragile was the fluorescent light tube inside, because that could shatter if it was dropped from sufficient height onto a sufficiently hard surface. Other than that, though, they were actually pretty sturdy. I mean, I wouldn't go as far to say that they're made of the same kind of whatever the hell it is that they made the original Game Boy out of. But Sega at the time actually made some pretty sturdy consoles. The Master System 2, which I don't know if you guys even got that version, but I have one on my bench over there, which needs modifying. I saw a friend of mine drop that from waist height onto a tiled floor, and it was fine. And bearing in mind that the Game Gear is basically the same thing in a smaller box. Make of that what you will.
The Gulf War Game Boy says that's cute.
Yeah, I know, but still.
Is the Gulf War Game Boy a one-off, or is that the regular?
That's the regular. Nintendo actually has very strict quality standards when it comes to releasing their consoles, and that's not just the Game Boy, that's anything across the board. Just as an
Joy-Con drift laughs in your face.
That's an anomaly. But like for example, when they released, this is a bit off topic, I acknowledge, but like when they were developing the 3DS, the rule was that it would not be allowed to hit market until the final design could survive, I think it was 10 consecutive falls from waist height without the hinges loosening or cracking on the screen. But they said the Game Boy is nigh indestructible. I've never been able to find citation for this, but I've heard rumors of a story where someone's life was saved because they had a Game Boy in their breast pocket and they got shot. The Game Boy took the bullet.
That sounds made up.
That sounds urban legendy to me.
Yeah, I've never been able to find a cited source for this, so if someone has it, please send it to me. But like, it's within the realm of believability because, again, just how nigh indestructible the Game Boy was. It, again, I feel like made it perfect, not just as a portable console, but as a console for children.
Okay. So another topic that I would like to briefly consider is aesthetic. So which of these, who was these two devices targeted at, and how did it aesthetically target them? Because, you know, we live in the age of cell phones and tablets and all these things that have to look good in order to sell it and stand above the rest. How did these try to aesthetically please their potential markets?
The Game Boy had that awesome transparent case where you could see all of the innards inside of it, and I've never been able to find one in the wild. That pisses me off because I want one so bad. So when the Game Boy originally launched, you had the classic gray brick, and then you also had the transparent one, which the case was just clear plastic, and like I said, you could see all the electronics inside. Really cool. That's the one that I think a lot of people remembered first. And then a couple years later came the Play It Loud line, where the Game Boy was actually released in a rainbow of different colors: red, green, yellow, black. There was a bunch of different colors released for the original Game Boy. Whereas the Game Gear, I think, barring a few special editions, I think only ever came in black.
It didn't.
Say again. You're
No, it didn't. The standard worldwide model was a kind of black greyish, but there were standard models that were red, yellow, white, blue. There was a blue and a white model that was available in the US. The other colours were available in Japan and the UK. There were also some special editions, like the Coca-Cola Kid version that was black, white, and bright red in the Coca-Cola colours. There was a Magic Knight Raya special edition. There was a really cool Virtua Fighter Mini version, which has awesome artwork of the Virtua Fighter characters on it, and I want one so bad, but they're squillions of pounds. There's also, you mentioned the kind of semi-transparent case. There is one for the Game Gear as well, but it's a Japanese exclusive. Gah!
Okay, see, a lot of these that you're bringing up, these are like special editions that I...
No, they're not. They're not. Not all of them.
The Coca-Cola one, the Magic Knight Raya, I would argue that these were marketed for collectors and weren't really meant for mass market, whereas all the colors of the original Game Boy that I've listed were very commonly mass marketed. Yeah, excuse me. Let me choose better words here because I'm talking pasta now. All the variations of the Game Boy that I've listed were mass marketed, were mass produced, and were not basically held as like, oh, you got to get this now or else you'll never see it again.
I just said the worldwide model that was available in all regions was black. In North America, you had a grey, white, and blue version. In Europe, we had the black standard version, red, yellow, and white. These are not uncommon. The problem with the white one is that it tends to go that kind of dark yellow colour because
that's what white plastic does.
And that is a problem with the OG Game Boy. It does tend to go an ugly yellow colour. This is what retrobrighting is for.
Okay, well,
in terms of the aesthetic design of the thing, as I mentioned before, they wanted the ergonomics to be a bit more comfortable. Also, as far as I'm aware, the section of the market that Sega were aiming at was kind of a bit older than what Nintendo were aiming at with the Game Boy, because Sega were kind of aiming at teenagers and up, and Nintendo were kind of aiming a bit lower in the age bracket than that.
See, I would argue, while I agree that yes, Sega was marketing the Game Gear towards the older teenage crowd, I would rebut the assertion that the Game Boy was marketed specifically towards children, just because, again, going back to Tetris as a pack-in, all those Japanese salarymen playing Tetris on their morning commute, I would argue that the Game Boy actually had more mass market appeal than just children. And I don't really have anywhere else to go with that because we're kind of running short on time here, and I don't want to run too long.
Okay, so final thing from me, cost. So we've talked about how so the Game Gear has a lot of like accoutrement with it, and the Game Boy obviously did not have as many things. So in terms of cost, obviously if there's a lot of peripherals for the Game Gear, then you are going to get more usage out of it. But obviously that's going to jack up the price because you've got to buy all of these extra things. Well, what do you guys feel about the cost and the usage ratio there?
The original Game Boy at launch was $89.99, and the cost of a pack of 4 AA batteries in the 90s was like $3.
How much was the clip-on light that you needed in order to use it for 8 hours?
I'd have to go researching that, and there were a bunch of different lights that were released. But I would argue if we're talking cost, we should limit it strictly to the cost of the core unit. Which in this case is $89.99 for the Game Boy.
On original release, according to the figures that I can see, when released in it was 1991, it was released in the US. The Game Gear was $149.95.
Okay, so in terms of the reason why I was asking about all the peripherals is because if you have more peripherals, that gives you more ways to use it and everything. So I was kind of seeing if you could...
I unfortunately don't have the information because there were, things like the battery pack and so on, there were actually a couple of different types.
Yeah, the problem with looking up cost for peripherals is if you say I'm looking for the Game Boy Light or the Game Gear Power Pack, the answer you're going to get is which one.
Okay, but that's not what I'm not asking about the individual prices of things, you guys. What I'm asking is defend the additional cost with the peripherals to usage. So if the Game Gear has a bunch of extra peripherals that allow you to pick it up to a TV or whatever, is it defend that extra cost in terms of getting that extra usage out of it versus the Game Boy not having all of those extra peripherals?
Both of the Game Boy Lights that I had growing up, including that insane-ass Handy Boy, which I'm really mad I threw away because it's worth buku bucks now, but that's neither here nor there. Both of them actually came with an attachment that you would slide into the Game Boy battery compartment, and it would run off of the Game Boy's batteries, which, while that would lower the overall battery life, also meant you didn't have to buy any additional batteries or use up any additional power plugs.
When I was with my friend who had a Game Gear, who also had the TV tuner, and we would actually be in her room watching stuff on the TV on the Game Gear with the sound turned down really low so our parents couldn't hear us because it was like stupid o'clock at night and we were supposed to have gone to bed. But we'd have it plugged in to the mains, so we didn't really notice the power drain. But I remember doing that on a number of occasions when I was over at hers, and I got the impression that she did something very similar. And from what I've heard, other people did the same thing. They would hide under the sheets playing the Game Gear, which you could do because it had a backlight. You just had to hope your parents didn't see the glow.
Okay.
So, in terms of sneakiness, I think that has a bit of an edge. The battery pack is more of a thing of necessity than anything else because it does eat through batteries unless you mod it. So, unless you plug it into the mains, then you need a battery pack or you need to spend a lot of money on batteries.
Okay.
I'm trying to find a price on the Game Gear TV tuner that's telling me $215, but I would be stunned if that's correct.
That can't be right. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's probably the price now for collectors. I doubt it was that expensive back then. The 90s were expensive, but I don't think they were that expensive.
We just need to fish out
my
an
friend,
old KB Toys catalog from somewhere.
Yeah, my friend was not that rich. I can tell you that for nothing.
Okay. All right. Well, we're kind of running out of time, so I guess, Kat, now it comes to you.
Okay. So, I don't know if I learned anything in all of this. Oh my goodness, there was so much, and my brain is so fried. So, it sounds like the Game Gear obviously had this cool color screen, and it was more ergonomic in its handhold, which would conceivably make it more accessible. In terms of more people being able to keep a grasp on it. And then the Game Boy had the long ass battery life and more mainstream games, I'd say. So, oh my god, guys, I don't know, because so obviously I'm trying not to be biased because I did have a Game Boy when I was a kid, and I did play a lot of Super Mario Land, and I never had a chance to play a Game Gear. So should I put myself in the mindset of a kid in the 90s or like as an adult now?
You're the moderator. That's up to you. So all I ask is that your decision be based on the arguments.
Why don't you do both? Because that could be interesting.
I think for bang for your buck, which is a phrase I really hate, but for value and usage, it's like obviously it's the Game Boy. You've got so much more battery life, and a lot of more, to me, more familiar game titles that I would probably be able to, as somebody who can't game, really get in there and just play casually. And that's how I did. Like, we would play on little short road trips and stuff like that. So like, yeah, in terms of bang for your buck, it's obviously the Game Boy at that lower cost and the longer battery life. You can just keep going and going and going like an Energizer Bunny. But I think for me now, ergonomics is such a big thing because I'm over 30. And if I just, sleep wrong, then I'm in pain for weeks. And I think like having that better handhold and having that backlight so that like my eyes are focused a little bit more. I think the backlight would get tiring after a while, but that green light is also quite tiring to look at. I don't think like either screen, for me at least, would be worse than the other. So like adult me would be like, I want the one with the color and that I can hold easier because I feel like it's going to be less painful for me in the long run. But I don't think for me personally that I would know as much about those game titles. And I think the cost of it, adult me cares less about the cost. So adult me is more concerned about the quality of gameplay, especially nowadays when we're all into like, oh, I have this thing and I can stream it. Being able to put it up on your TV with this TV tuner, even if it wasn't the greatest then, that would have made me more excited to try it at least. So I feel like that the Game Gear had more versatility, and the Game Boy had more marketability.
So if you had to pick one, which you do, what would it be?
Oh no. I'd probably. God. Okay. Guys, do me a favor.
Yeah.
Describe your chosen game, gear or boy, in one single word. If I'm gonna have to rack my brain, so are you people.
Colorful.
One at a time.
Well, if I only have one word, fun, I guess.
Fun. Okay. And Skyblaze said colorful. Okay. I'd have to go with the Game Gear. Based on everything presented, it's really, for me, honestly, it comes down to that, like, the backlit screen. My eyes, they're garbage, you guys. They're really, really bad. And if I'm going to sit for any amount of time and play a game, I don't want to be having to rely on the natural light and all of that. It's really tough though, since I've never actually played a Game Gear. But I really think that backlight is such, for me personally, is such a seller.
Well, then Skyblaze, well argued, and I concede this match to you.
Yes. So, but you guys, our dear, sweet, darling listeners, please sound off in the comments about, based on the arguments given today, which one would you guys go with?
This. I'm gonna be honest. I knew going into this was going to be a hard one, because the two big things that made the Game Boy successful, which, as we've already said, history shows the Game Boy was the more successful, but the two big things were that battery life and Pokemon, and I knew I was not going to be able to build my arguments just on those two things. So this is actually a really hard one to prepare for, because I knew Skyblaze was going to bring their A game on this one.
Yeah. I mean,
it helps that I've actually done an entire episode of my Radio Sega show about the Game Gear and the Nomad, so I had most of the research already done.
Yeah, but this is a fun episode. I enjoy doing this, and so like I said, this is the first part of the first episode of something new that we're trying for Nerd of the Third Power. Future episodes, we've already talked about. Hashing out that old war, the Super Nintendo versus the Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive, as you call it in Europe. So, yeah.
That's the correct name. It's called that everywhere apart from the United States.
You're awful about that sort of thing.
So,
there is actually a reason for it, believe it or not.
Is it a contractual patent reason?
It's because the name was already taken. Mega Drive is the name of a hard drive company here in the US in the 90s.
Yep.
But yeah, no, this is a lot of fun, and I definitely look forward to doing more of these. But that is all the time that we have for Nerd of the Third Power this week. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. As always, I'm Dr. Gonzo.
I'm the cat.
I'm Skyblaze.
All right, we'll see you next time. Taka, play us out.